Good evening, Dungeon Masters, I'm Baron Durop. Bungie's 2001 release, Halo Combat Evolved, gave us one of the most influential multiplayer maps in FPS level design history. What makes Blood Gulch so interesting, however, compared to some of its contemporary counterparts, like Unreal Tournament's Facing Worlds and Counter-Strike's Dust 2, was its clear inspiration from early Halo game concepts. Halo's development started as a real-time strategy title, after all. Therefore, where Dust 2 and Facing Worlds were highly focused on fast-paced lane control, Blood Gulch slowed down the gameplay experience, allowing players to utilize squad-centric tactics more deeply. With that said, there's a lot we can learn from the layout and player usage of this map to enhance our D&D combat encounter design. Blood Gulch's map design is as simple as it is elegant. As for Blood Gulch's layout, two bases flank opposing ends of a large gully, connected by winding hills and a no man's land between them. On perpendicular edges of the map is a series of tunnels or ledges that line the canyon's rock faces, providing tight quarters and high vantage points for players to sneak, snipe, or otherwise cover the map's center. Despite the relatively open feeling of the map's design, there's actually quite a bit of cover to be had. Players spawn into the level obscured from distant enemies by the two large hills in the center of the map, and spawning opponents are only visible to each other from on top of their respective bases. The layout of this map further means players can navigate their way through the no man's land and avoid sniper fire from either base, while players riding vehicles can quickly zip across the map to avoid snipers either from the base rooftops or the cliff edges. Further, power-ups like the overshield, rocket launcher, and active camo are found in that no man's land area, which is easily accessed by each base's portal. Teams of players with practiced strategies, especially in Capture the Flag games, can deploy among various roles, much like a hockey or soccer team would. Two players can grab a warthog and zoom their way across the map. A sniper can run for one of the cliff edges to cover the power-ups and returning flag-wielding warthog players, and the fourth player offers further zone coverage over the items in the center of the map, or flexing into flag-carrying, driver, sniper, or anti-sniper roles as needed. So how can we use these observations of terrain design and player role fulfillment to improve our D&D combat encounters? The most boring kind of combat encounter is the mano-a-mano hit point attrition. Players get absurdly bored when they can waltz right up to the big ape in the middle of the battle mat and exchange licks until one of them dies. It's specifically boring because terrain and strategy isn't being used. While spellcasters have access to battlefield control spells, rangers and rogues have abilities for taking cover and firing from a distance, and fighters can either screen or rush enemies in response to shifting enemy attack patterns, it becomes self-evident that D&D combat is best exemplified when enemies can leverage the terrain and their abilities to their fullest advantage. Foundationally, a scenario's environment must be designed to facilitate this behavior, and the Dungeon Master must deploy a mix of monsters which utilize that environment to the fullest extent. By filling the battlefield with blocking and scattered terrain, and by placing scalable cliffs or ruined buildings with roofs connected by ladders and gangplanks, we can make interesting encounter locations. Further, by placing scalable cliff faces, a ruined tower, or some other terrain with constrained elevated access creates an interesting puzzle for melee-focused characters to solve as they approach the ranged enemies taking cover within. Creating a dynamic battlefield isn't enough, however. Enemies must think intelligently and move among the terrain's various attack lanes to cover and support each other. This works best when enemies have multivariate abilities which complement one another, much the same way a typical D&D character complements their party members. Skeleton archers should be backed up by a necromancer cleric and a handful of ghoul bodyguards, and goblins riding attack wolves could be supported by a hobgoblin shaman and a few bugbear bruisers. Even in the Halo franchise itself, grunts, jackals, and elites all form a complementary mix of units in much the same way. Dealing with a handful of grunts by themselves is simple, but when jackal snipers are in the trees, grunts are standing by to hurl grenades which are protected by a jackal shield wall, and the elites charge ahead to flush the Master Chief out of cover, it's easy to see how terrain demands tactical thinking. In a D&D encounter, therefore, as different kinds of enemies shuffle to different parts of the battlefield in order to exploit the terrain to their best advantage, Dungeon Masters should create dynamic and interesting situations players must work through together to solve. This is especially the case when time-sensitive non-combat goals add pressure to the showdown. In essence, by leveraging leveraging Blood Gulch design fundamentals to place blocking terrain, scatter, constraining elevation changes, and a healthy mix of complementary monster types, your combat encounters will be as interesting as they are challenging. If you'd like to help me create more content like this in the future, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night.